Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Another History. Today we have a special guest, Tejas,
Hello.
and it's also a special episode because we've picked a random year and two different regions, and we're going to compare them and see some of their similarities and differences. So, on 11th of April 1689, the English Parliament ended the reign of James II and the Seventh, King of England, Scotland, and Ireland, and adopted the Articles of Grievances and the Claim of Right Act, which made Parliament the primary legislative power in Scotland. A month later, William III of Orange and Mary II, who had deposed James in the Glorious Revolution of 1688, accepted the crown of Scotland. The 1696 Jacobite assassination plot was one of a series of plots attempting to restore James to the throne. Sir George Barclay took over the coordination of plans for James to return from France with an invasion force, but realised this was hopeless and went back to the idea of kidnapping, or really assassinating, William. The plan was that on returning from hunting, William would take a ferry from the south bank to the north bank of the River Thames at Kew. A point was chosen on a lane which was narrow enough so that the royal coach and 6 horses would not be able to manoeuvre, and they would surprise William and his armed escort, and they would be stuck and trapped in his coach. They were ready to act by February 1696. But William Trumbull, who was Secretary of State for the Northern Department at the time, had already heard about the plotting, and on 23rd of February, a proclamation was made against around 40 conspirators. A long sequence of trials related to the plot began in March, and 9 Jacobites were executed. Barclay escaped to France. The House of Commons agreed to the swearing of an association, in effect a loyalty oath, to William as king. But that didn't stop the Scottish Jacobite movement. 20,000 Scots fought for the Jacobites in 1708 and 1715 uprisings, and 14,000 fought in the 1745 uprising, including the Battle of Culloden. Even though the Stuarts never returned to the throne, the political movement of the Jacobites and the revolts it inspired would change the course of history forever.
Now, for the second part of the episode. The year is 1680, and modern day New Mexico is under the rule of the Spaniards. The region consists of multiple cultures such as the Native Americans and the Puebloan Indians. The Spaniards, like most other colonizers, were focusing on eradication of local religion and culture while enforcing their way of living on the Puebloan people. Eradication of spiritual practices, ban on local medicine, outlawing folk dance were one of the few methods. Initially, the Pueblans welcomed the Spaniards with open arms, but like any other revolution or a revolt, this one needs a breaking point as well. As the Spaniards increased their restriction on the Orthodox tradition along with enforcement of Christianity, their rule started to take a dark turn. They were seen as oppressors by the Pueblan people. All the medicine practitioners were being arrested, beaten, and sometimes even killed as they were seen as pagans and the ones using witchcraft. In such an event, Pope of San Juan Pueblo was arrested along with 45 other medicine practitioners and beaten. Some of them were beaten to death by the government. Pope, along with the rest of the others, was released later. This had a major impact on Pope's life, and he decided to overthrow the current rule. As every Pueblan had it all from the oppressing government, they rallied to Pope's call for the revolt. In 1680, Pope rallied all his forces against the relatively smaller force of 400 strong of Spaniards. The Spanish witnessed heavy casualties on both civilian and the soldiers' side. Due to this, the Spaniards had to retreat and leave their colonies behind. Pope's government had a brief moment of success of 12 years, but the Pueblans were recaptured in 1692 by the governor Pedro de Vargas. Later on, the Spaniards ruled the Pueblan establishments in 1696 by a lenient rule.
So, even though both of these events were thousands of miles apart, both of these events also have similarities. Both of these events were seeking to overthrow an oppressive authority and the ruling government, and both events involved religious and cultural differences. And both events resulted in unjust arrests, which ultimately led to further resistance. But the Puebloan revolt was in the short term successful, where the Scottish Jacobite movement was momentarily stifled with the failed assassination plot. And the Pueblans killed civilians along with soldiers to drive the Spaniards out of Santa Fe, whereas the Scottish Jacobites only intended to kill the king.
So both the events demonstrate throughout history it is people using everyday weapons of resistance who are most successful in achieving social change. And both these events occur in 1696 at the very same moment. So no matter where or when in history we look at, there always have been and there always will be struggles for justice.